A bruise, a kiss, and your dying words. Not how I thought I'd be paid for this case. Modern Queen Tales presents Such is Death. Chapter 1. The San Isidro Blood. The blood on the Persian rug in the CEO's office was already turning the color of dried plums. It pool spread across the intricate blue silk patterns, sticky and thick in the humid air of San Isidro. The financial district of Lima was always damp, wrapped in a gray fog that the locals called the donkey's belly. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Royal Corp's penthouse suite, the high-rise buildings of the city looked like dirty teeth rising out of the mist. I knelt beside the stain, pressing the tip of my gloved index finger into the edge of the dark pool. The blood was cold. Hector Aliaga, the night guard, had been dead for 6 hours. His body was already gone, carted off to the central morgue, but the smell of his sudden departure remained. It was a sharp mix of copper, voided bowels, and cheap lavender cologne. "The police are done with the physical sweep," a voice said behind me. Rather than turning around immediately, I closed my eyes, letting my fingers savor the dry texture of the high-end rug. At 30 years old, I knew how to read a room by what was left behind. In Tokyo, Nagano Ayako, had been a rising star in the Metropolitan Police Department. Then came the fentanyl, the sleepless nights, the rainy highway, and the sound of my patrol car wrapping around a concrete pillar. The department fired me before the glass was swept from my scalp. Now, I lived in Peru, working as a private investigator for the kind of wealthy expatriates and corrupt executives who trusted foreign eyes more than the local authorities. A Japanese ex-cop carried a reputation for silence and efficiency that paid my rent in Miraflores and kept me in imported cigarettes. I stood up, wiping my gloved finger against my thigh. I turned to face Marcos. Marcos was the head of Royal Corp's network security. He was a slender man of 28 with a mop of unruly brown curls that fell into his eyes. He wore an oversized gray cardigan that seemed to swallow his narrow chest, and he leaned heavily on a pair of silver forearm crutches. His right leg hung slightly limp, his foot turning inward. Behind his thick, wire-rimmed glasses, his dark eyes were wide and watery. He looked like a creature that had spent its entire life in the glow of a computer monitor. "Did they find anything on the lock?" I asked, my voice flat. "No," Marcos said. His voice was soft, carrying a slight tremor. He shifted his weight on his crutches, the metal clicking against the marble border of the room. "The CEO's private safe was opened with a physical key and the secondary biometric bypass. The thief knew the codes. He knew the guard's rounds. And the footage? I have it on my tablet," he said. He reached down, his fingers fumbling with the strap of a ruggedized leather case slung over his shoulder. He pulled out a black screen, his thumb sliding over the glass. As he stepped closer to show me, the scent of him hit me. He smelled of laundry detergent, mint gum, and the faint, sweet sweat of fear. He was standing too close. I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I looked down and saw his eyes dart to my lips, then quickly back to the screen. He was attracted to me. It was a common reaction from men like him, the quiet, fragile ones who looked at a woman with a scar on her jaw and a gun under her arm as if she were a dark fantasy. I wouldn't acknowledge it. I needed his access codes, his fingers on the keyboard, and his absolute cooperation. His infatuation was an asset. "Watch here," Marcos whispered, pointing a thin finger at the screen. The video was black and white, high definition. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The hallway outside the CEO's office was empty. Then a figure appeared from the shadow of the service alcove. The man was tall, wearing a tight black tactical jacket and a silver ballistic mask that completely obscured his face. He walked with a smooth, feline grace. In the frame, a second figure appeared from the opposite direction. It was Marcos, On the video, Marcos was hobbling along on his crutches, carrying a stack of system printouts. The masked man never hesitated. He stepped forward, drove a heavy fist into Marcos's stomach, and then kicked his crutches out from under him. The digital Marcos crashed to the floor, his head bouncing off the wall. He lay there, twitching in pain. "He hit you hard," I observed, watching the screen. "I have 2 cracked ribs," Marcos said, his hand rising to touch his side. He was incredibly fast. I didn't even see him come out of the shadows. On the screen, Hector Aliaga, the guard, stepped out of the office door, his hand reaching for his holster. The masked man was faster. He raised a suppressed pistol and fired once. Hector crumpled. The thief then stepped over Marcos's groaning form, entered the office, and emerged 3 minutes later with a small silver flash drive. Then came the anomaly. The thief walked toward the end of the corridor, toward the emergency exit staircase. The camera at the end of the hall captured his approach, but the camera inside the stairwell never registered his entry. The exterior cameras around the building showed nothing. A grown man in a silver mask had vanished into 30 feet of windowless concrete corridor. "Show me the exit footage again," I said. Marcos tapped the screen. We watched the thief walk toward the camera. He was 5 feet away, then 4, then he stepped out of the frame of the hallway camera. The stairwell camera, which should have picked him up a fraction of a second later, showed only empty gray concrete stairs. "The system didn't drop a frame," Marcos said, anticipating my question. I checked the code myself. There was no loop, no digital deletion. The feed was continuous. "People do not turn into air, Marcos." "I know," he said, looking up at me. His face was very close to mine. I could see the tiny gold flecks in his brown irises, but I can't explain it. "I can give you access to every server, every log, every camera in the building. Just tell me what you need, Ayako." "I need to see the body," I said, stepping back to break the circle of his warmth. "Let's go to the morgue." Chapter 2. The View from the Slab. The morgue of the Hospital Nacional dos de Mayo was located in a basement that felt like a tomb. The air was cold, but it did not keep the smell of decay at bay. It was a heavy, sweet odor that clung to the back of the throat like grease. The walls were covered in pale green tiles, cracked and stained with years of condensation. The medical examiner, an elderly man with yellowed fingernails, pulled out metal tray number 42. The tray slid open with a screech of ungreased rollers. Hector Aliaga lay beneath a stiff white sheet. The examiner pulled the cloth down to his chest. Hector's face was pale, his skin possessing the waxy, translucent quality of cheap soap. In the center of his forehead was a neat, circular hole, purple around the edges. Marcos stood a step behind me. The moment the sheet was pulled back, his breath caught. His face turned the color of the tiles. He leaned heavily on his crutches, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the metal handles. A thin bead of sweat rolled down his temple. I shouldn't have come," Marcos stammered, looking at the floor. "I don't like blood. It makes my stomach turn." I reached out, grabbed his jaw with my gloved hand, and forced his head up. His skin was cold, his muscles tense under my fingers. I made him look directly at the bullet hole in Hector's forehead. "Look at it," I said, my voice low and steady. "That's what death looks like. It is not clean, and it does not look like the movies. If you are going to work with me, you need to get used to the sight of it. The man who did this is still walking around this city. He has the files, and he has the gun." Marcos trembled under my grip. His eyes dilated, staring at the corpse, then down at my hand on his jaw. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. "I understand," he whispered. I released his chin and turned back to the examiner. "Did you find any other trauma?" "Only the entry wound," the doctor said in Spanish, his voice dry. The bullet is still inside the skull. A 9mm round. Standard. No other marks on the body. I leaned closer to the corpse. Marcos, give me the tablet. Open the footage of the shooting. Zoom in on Hector's face. Marcos fumbled with the tablet, his fingers shaking so much he almost dropped it. He tapped the screen several times before clearing the display. He zoomed in on the guard's face in the seconds before the masked man drew his weapon. The digital image was grainy but clear enough to see the expression on Hector's face. In the hallway of Royal Corp, Hector had not looked surprised by a stranger. His eyebrows had pulled together, his lips parting in a brief, sudden realization. He had spoken a word. "Look at his mouth," I said, pointing to the screen. He wasn't shouting for help. He was saying a name. I watched the loop play 5 times. The lips parted. The tongue touched the teeth. A soft, round shape of the mouth, followed by a sharp consonant and another vowel. "Oh," I muttered, mimicking the movement. S-C-A-R, Oscar. Marcos stared at the screen, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Oscar? You think he knew the shooter?" "He knew him," I said, standing straight. "And he called him by name. That is why the shooter didn't hesitate. The moment he was recognized, Hector was a dead man." I turned to the examiner and thanked him, then led Marcos out of the cold basement. The warm, humid air of the Lima streets felt like a wet blanket after the chill of the morgue. "Who is Oscar?" I asked as we walked to my battered black sedan. Marcos adjusted his crutches, his breath still coming in short, shallow gasps. I don't know many people outside the IT department, but I can check the human resources database." "Give me a minute." He sat in the passenger seat, resting his crutches against the dashboard. His fingers flew across the tablet. The blue light reflected off his glasses, hiding his eyes. After a minute, a profile popped up on the screen. "Oscar Mendoza," Marcos said. "He was a janitor. He worked at Royal Corp for 6 years. He was fired 3 days ago." "Why?" "The report says erratic behavior and theft of cleaning supplies. But look at this. He was the night janitor for the penthouse floor. He had keys to every utility closet on the executive level." "And where does Oscar Mendoza live?" I asked, turning the key in the ignition. "Rimac," Marcos said, reading the address from the screen. "A tenement building near the river." I shifted the car into gear and pulled out into the chaotic traffic of Lima. The sun was setting, turning the gray fog into a dull orange smudge over the Pacific. Chapter 3. The Smell of Rot. The district of Rimac was a maze of crumbling colonial buildings, narrow alleys, and dusty hills. The air here was different from San Isidro. It was thick with the smell of exhaust, fried garlic, and the stagnant water of the river. The paint on the yellow concrete buildings was peeling like sunburnt skin. We parked 2 blocks away from the address. Marcos struggled out of the car, his crutches clanking against the dry dirt of the sidewalk. A group of local children stopped playing soccer to watch us. They stared at my leather jacket and Marcos's silver crutches as if we had just stepped off a spacecraft. "This place is dangerous," Marcos whispered, drawing closer to my side, his shoulder brushed against mine. He was looking around with wide, anxious eyes. "We should have brought the police." "The police in this city are busy protecting the people who pay them," I said, checking the weight of the 9mm Glock hidden under my jacket. "We are on our own." We found the building. It was a 3-story tenement with a rusting iron gate that stood half open. The interior courtyard was dark, filled with hanging laundry and the sound of a television playing a soccer match. Oscar Mendoza's apartment was on the top floor, at the end of a long concrete balcony that overlooked the courtyard. As we climbed the stairs, the smell hit us. It was not the smell of Remax streets. It was the smell I had encountered in Tokyo apartments when old people died alone and lay undiscovered for weeks. It was a thick, greasy stench that seemed to coat the skin. It smelled of wet leather, sulfur, and sweet, rotting fat. Marcos stopped on the second landing. He pressed his hand to his mouth, his shoulders heaving. "Oh, God," he gasped. "What is that?" "That is what death smells like," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. "Suck it up, Marcos. We are almost there." I didn't wait for him. I walked up the final flight of stairs to room 4B. The door was wooden, the blue paint blistered by the sun. The padlock had been cut, the padlock latch hanging loose from the frame. I pushed the door open with my foot. The apartment was small, consisting of a single room with a stained mattress on the floor and a plastic table covered in empty beer bottles. Flies buzzed in a thick black cloud around the mattress. Oscar Mendoza lay on his back across the dirty sheets. He was a stocky man in his 50s, wearing a dirty white undershirt and blue trousers. His skin had turned a dark purplish gray, his abdomen bloated with gas. His eyes were wide open, staring at the cracked plaster of the ceiling, dry and cloudy like marbles. In the center of his chest was a dark, crusty hole where the blood had pooled and dried. Marcos reached the doorway and immediately turned away, leaning against the concrete railing of the balcony. I could hear him dry heaving into the courtyard below. I ignored him and entered the room. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket and began to search. The room had been tossed, but the search had been hurried. Drawers were pulled out, clothes scattered across the floor. I knelt by the mattress, holding my breath against the stench. I slid my hand under the edge of the bed. My fingers brushed against a thick sheet of paper. I pulled it out. It was an architectural blueprint, old and yellowed at the edges. The title block in the corner read, Royal Corp Headquarters, Original Construction, 1985. I spread it out on the plastic table, ignoring the flies that landed on the paper. The blueprint showed the building before the massive remodeling project that had taken place 5 years ago. I traced my finger along the central core of the building. There was a vertical shaft, 5 feet wide, that ran from the penthouse executive restroom straight down to the basement drainage system. It was a central ventilation shaft, designed for the building's old industrial air conditioning unit. In the new blueprints, this shaft was marked as sealed with concrete. But on this old blueprint, someone had made a mark in red ink. An arrow pointed to the shaft, and beside it was written a single word in Spanish, abierto, open. I stared at the red ink. A man who knew the old layout of the building could enter the penthouse, steal the files, walk into the CEO's private bathroom, and drop down the shaft into the basement. From there, he could walk out through the sewer system directly into the Rimac River bed, completely bypassing every modern security camera in the building. But a 55-year-old janitor with a beer belly and arthritis could not slide down a 5-foot vertical concrete shaft. It required physical strength, agility, and a body that could take a hard drop. I looked out the door. Marcos was leaning against the railing, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. His knuckles were tight on his crutches. I looked back at the blueprint. The pieces of the puzzle began to slide into place, shifting like gears in a lock. I recalled the security video. I recalled the way the masked man had struck Marcos, knocking him to the floor. The blow had looked brutal, but Marcos had survived with only 2 cracked ribs. And the Marcos on the screen had been wearing a thick cardigan, his head down, his face hidden by his long curls. I recalled the way the guard had looked at the Marcos on the ground just before the shooting. The guard had not looked at the masked man. He had looked at the man on the floor, and his lips had formed the name Oscar. The guard had recognized Oscar Mendoza, but Oscar Mendoza was not the masked man. Oscar Mendoza was the man on the floor, pretending to be Marcos. I folded the blueprint and slid it inside my jacket. I walked out of the apartment, my boot heels clicking on the concrete balcony. "Did you find anything?" Marcos asked, his voice trembling. He looked pale, his eyes wet behind his glasses. "I found enough," I said. "Let's go back to the office. I need you to run one more search for me." Chapter 4: The Blueprint of a Lie. The Royal Corp headquarters was dark when we returned. The night staff had been sent home early due to the investigation, leaving the lobby empty. The marble floor reflected the dim security lights, like black water. We took the elevator to the server room in the basement. It was a vast, cold space filled with rows of tall black racks. The hum of the servers was a constant, low vibration that rattled the fillings in my teeth. The air was dry, smelling of silicone and hot plastic. Marcos hobbled to his workstation, his crutches clicking on the raised metal floor panels. He sat down in his ergonomic chair, letting his crutches fall against the desk. He logged into the system, his fingers moving across the keyboard with a speed that did not match his clumsy physical movements. "What do you want me to search for?" he asked, not looking at me. "I want you to show me the employment contract for Oscar Mendoza," I said, standing behind him. I rested my hand on the back of his chair, leaning down so my breath brushed his ear. "And I want to see the maintenance records for the central ventilation shaft." Marcos froze. His fingers hovered over the keys, still and silent. The only sound in the room was the steady, angry roar of the server fans. "Why would you want to see that?" he asked. His voice had lost its tremor. It was flat, cold, and entirely steady. "Because Oscar Mendoza didn't steal the files," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "And he didn't slide down the concrete shaft. He was too old, too fat, and too drunk. But he knew about the shaft because he was the janitor who helped seal the building 5 years ago. Or rather, he was supposed to seal it, but he left it open for a price." Marcos remained still. He kept his eyes fixed on the screen, which showed a prompt cursor blinking in the dark. "The video was a theater production, Marcos," I continued, my hand sliding down from the chair to touch his shoulder. The muscles under his wool cardigan were not soft, they were hard as iron. "The man who got hit by the thief was not you. It was Oscar Mendoza dressed in your clothes, wearing your wig, and using your crutches. He took the fall to give you an alibi. The security guard saw him on the floor, recognized him under the wig, and said his name. Oscar. You couldn't let the guard live after that, so you shot him." Marcos slowly turned his head to look at me. He took off his glasses. Without them, his face changed completely. The watery, weak look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, dark intensity that was beautiful and terrifying. He smiled, a slow, sharp curve of his lips. "You are very smart, Ayako," he said. His voice was deeper now, devoid of the stutter. "Sweeter than I expected. Most of the people in this country are lazy. They don't look past the surface. They see a cripple, and they look away. They see a foreigner, and they assume she is just here for the money." "You killed Oscar Mendoza because he got cold feet," I said, my hand moving slowly toward my holster. He realized that a murder charge was different from a simple corporate heist. "He wanted out, so you went to his apartment and put a bullet in his chest." "Oscar was a liability," Marcos said, his hand dropping to his side. "He was a drunk. He would have talked the moment the police offered him a bottle of rum." "And the files?" Marcos reached into his cardigan. I half feared he'd pull a gun. Instead, he pulled out the silver flash drive, holding it between 2 fingers. The metal caught the blue light of the servers. "These files are not corporate secrets, Ayako," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. They are evidence. My parents were investigative journalists. 20 years ago, they discovered that Royal Corp was using its shipping lines to import 70% of the precursor chemicals used by the local cartels. They were shot in their beds while I hid in the closet. The police called it a robbery. The CEO of Royal Corp paid for my education. He thought it was charity. I call it an investment. So you took the job here to get the proof, I said. I spent 5 years playing the helpless nerd, Marcos said, his voice rising above the hum of the servers. I limped through these halls. I let them spit on me, let them mock my crutches. I built their network, and I found the back doors. These files contain the bank accounts, the shipment numbers, the names of every politician and police chief on the payroll. This is the truth, Ayako. It is the only thing that matters to me. It is still murder, I said, my fingers wrapping around the grip of my Glock. It is justice, he said. He stood up. No need for crutches anymore. He stood straight, his legs perfectly aligned, his shoulders broad and square. He was 6 feet tall, his posture athletic and balanced. The silver crutches clattered to the floor, the metal sound echoing through the cold room. I don't want to hurt you, Marco said, stepping toward me. I like you. I've watched you for weeks. You have the same dark look in your eyes that I have. You are a ghost, just like me. Come with me. We can leave this city. We can sell a fraction of this data to their competitors and live like kings in Europe. I am a cop, I said, drawing my gun and pointing it at his chest. Or at least, I used to be. Old habits die hard. You are no cop, Marcos whispered. You are just a survivor. Chapter 5. The Bitter Taste. Marcos moved before I could pull the trigger. His speed was not human. He simply vanished from my line of sight. A hard hand struck my wrist, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. My Glock flew from my fingers, clattering across the metal floor. I reacted on instinct, throwing a left hook toward his jaw. Marcos blocked it with his forearm, his movement smooth and practiced. He grabbed my jacket, using my own momentum to throw me against a server rack. My back hit the metal frame with a dull thud, knocking the air from my lungs. I gasped, my eyes watering from the impact. Marcos was already on me, pinning my arms against the rack. His body was pressed against mine, hot and heavy. His chest was broad, his muscles tight and lean under the gray cardigan. He smelled of sweat and copper now, the sweet scent of his fear gone, replaced by the raw odor of adrenaline. I told you, he whispered, his face inches from mine. I don't want to hurt you. Too bad, I spit out. I brought my knee up, hard, into his groin. He anticipated the move, shifting his hips to block it, but the distraction was enough. I freed my right arm, reached into my boot, and pulled my backup weapon, a small, double-action 5-shot revolver. I pressed the barrel against his ribs and pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot was deafening in the enclosed room. The muzzle flash illuminated his face for a fraction of a second, showing his eyes wide with surprise. Marcos gasped, a sharp, wet sound. He stumbled back, his hands clutching his side. Blood immediately began to seep through the wool of his gray cardigan, dark and thick. He fell against his desk, knocking over a stack of papers and a plastic cup of coffee. I stood up, my back aching, my hand shaking, as I pointed the small revolver at him. It's over, Marcos. He looked down at his hand, which was covered in bright red, oxygenated blood. He laughed, a wet, rattling sound. You really are a cop, he muttered in a perfect Japanese I had no idea he could speak. He refused to fall. He gathered his remaining strength, his face pale, his eyes burning with a desperate, wild light. He lunged forward, throwing his entire weight into me. We crashed to the floor together. The revolver flew from my hand, sliding into the dark space under the server racks. Marcos pinned me to the floor. His strength was fading, but his weight was immense. He held my wrists down with his hands, his grip tight despite the blood slicking his fingers. I struggled beneath him, but he was too heavy, his body locking mine in place. "Ayako," he whispered. His voice was thick, his breath smelling of copper and hot iron. He lowered his head. I tried to turn my face away, but his hand moved to my chin, holding my jaw tight, just as I had held his in the morgue. He kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hard, desperate, and violent, born of pain and the sudden realization of his own end. His lips were wet with his own blood, and as he pressed them against mine, the taste of iron filled my mouth. It was bitter, sharp, and cold, like sucking on a copper coin. His grip relaxed, his body went soft, his chest sinking against mine with a long, rattling sigh. His head fell onto my shoulder, his dark curls brushing against my cheek. "That's," Marcos whispered, his voice fading into the hum of the servers. "That's what death tastes like." He did not move again. I lay there for a long time under his weight, the cold metal floor beneath us, the hum of the servers above us. The blood from his chest soaked through my shirt, warm and sticky, before turning cold in the air-conditioned room. Finally, I pushed his body off me. He lay on his back, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling of the server room. Without his glasses, his face looked young, peaceful, and entirely empty. I stood up, my bones aching. I found the silver flash drive lying on the desk. I picked it up, its cold metal surface feeling heavy in my hand. I could have called the police. Maybe I should have, but I did not. I walked out of the building into the cold, damp air of the San Isidro night. I went back to my apartment in Miraflores, packed my single suitcase, and sat at my computer. I uploaded every file on the silver drive to the servers of 3 major international news agencies, the Department of Justice in Washington, and the central offices of the Peruvian National Press. By morning, the name Royal Corp would be synonymous with death, drugs, and corruption. I bought a one-way ticket to Tokyo. As the plane climbed into the gray fog over the Pacific, I looked down at the city of Lima disappearing beneath the clouds. The taste of copper was still in my mouth, and I knew it was a flavor I would never be able to wash away. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.